Welcome
Welcome
to
to Arts and Entertainment with Chris
Chris
and
and
Randall.
Randall. We're on our way. I'm Chris,
I'm Randall.
and welcome to our show where we discuss arts and entertainment, and hopefully we just talk about arts and I don't even know the difference anymore.
Okay, well,
entertainment. Have you ever figured out why we call it arts and entertainment? Because
that's the traditional terminology for arts and entertainment, right? I mean, traditionally there was. Actually, I have a theory about entertainment. You want to hear it?
Go for it.
So, well, actually, I studied this in film school too. It was like in postmodern classes. So anyway, art is well, there's art and then there's entertainment, right? So entertainment is a product. Okay, this is my own idea. Entertainment's a product. It's something you make to sell, something you make for the audience. Okay, that's entertainment. It's like entertainment really first starts in vaudeville, right? So the old vaudeville, that's the first time you have anything that's the first time you have entertainment, which is just like a commoditization of art. Okay, and art is very broad and very general. You know, art is like something that
wait, are you saying that
an expression
prior to
of the artist?
There was no entertainment. There was no like circuses, carnivals.
Well, that counts as entertainment too. But
been around since like forever,
right? That counts as entertainment. Parades, yeah, maybe the Roman theater. Yeah, that's entertainment.
So basically, since the beginning of Western civilization.
Yeah, in a way, but that's the thing. See, like some film theorists would say that there is a division between art and entertainment, but sometimes entertainment can be art. Okay, so like for instance, you take the era of the 70s, right? 70s movie era. So the 70s movie era is famous because that is when art and entertainment coalesced into one thing. So you had movies that were both art and entertainment. And today you have movies like blockbusters that are entertainment, but they're not too artistic. Okay, some people might say. All right. So the Marvel movies, you know, the superhero movies, a pejorative term is cape shit. Sometimes people say critics will say. But yeah, I mean, those movies are the top movies today. But like back in the 70s, you'd have top movies that are like, I don't know, Chinatown.
Like the Deer Hunter or something?
The Deer Hunter, Chinatown.
Fine.
The Godfather.
But I mean, at the same time, you had Herbie Rides Again, Herbie the Love Bug.
Sure, but
you
those
had
movies...
a million Burt Reynolds comedies like Smokey and the Bandit.
Sure, but
Battle Beyond the Stars.
Those movies weren't the top in the box office. Okay,
they were.
In the box office was the Godfather.
They were some big budget blockbuster schlock. Trust me.
All right.
I lived that. You were born in that decade. I was alive in that decade.
Okay.
Oh my God. I mean, it's okay. I don't want to stick a pin in your theory.
Well,
we can do a whole show.
It's not just my theory, okay? This is just what a lot of people would say, okay?
But I mean, there's been crappy movies that have done well since the first films. You know, it wasn't like I just don't believe there's an era in which films are great and all of a sudden great films just happen. I guess, by the way, we found our topic today.
Well, that's not the point, really. I mean, yeah, I guess we found our topic.
We're going to talk about something.
We're going to talk about something completely different. Let's just talk about this.
Let's just talk about. Or you want your topic was pretty good.
No, this is better.
You sure?
Yeah. Okay. Why don't we just talk about it? I mean,
I want to frame this because when I was in college, I had a professor. I took a class called The Art of Film. And he was an English teacher, but we didn't have a film department in my school, so that's how it went. And every time he showed a movie, at the very end, he always go, well, that was a good film, but is it art? It was from Brooklyn, so I could actually do his voice. So I was like, but is it art? And then he'd make us write whole papers about whether we thought it was art or not. And I will definitely be the contrarian on this one, because to me, I prefer lowbrow, middlebrow, and highbrow personally. I think that culture is always going to be those three, that dichotomy, the trichotomy, three. So I don't believe that you always have to go, well, this is schlock and this is gene. Well, no, you can tell with schlock. Anyway, you have a point. Why don't you make it, because I'm rambling.
Well, okay. So what you're saying is there's low art and high art. Low art being something like vaudeville and entertainment and other entertainment, and high
Low
art.
And high art and middle brow. And the middle is kind of really most art. And it's brow, high brow, low brow.
Okay, so middle brow is like a combination of like elements of high art and elements of low art.
90%, I think, of what we watch and listen to and read is middle brow.
Okay.
So what do I mean? You want me to define my terms?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so what am I talking about that? So if you go all the way to ancient Greece, you go to Aristophanes' The Clouds, which is a satire on Plato and on Socrates, sorry. And in it, Socrates is just farting all over people, and that's why it's called The Clouds. It's about farts, jokes about farts, which have been around forever. That's low brow. Whereas Oedipus Rex, which is a Greek tragedy that deals with our own ability to fight fate. Can we fight fate? Oedipus is told to, he is destined to kill his father and all of these things. Well, if you actually watched an actual production of Oedipus the Colonist or Oedipus the King, I would say that's high art. It requires more from the viewer. You certainly need to be as engaged intellectually and emotionally as you can. Whereas Hail Caesar with George Clooney, that's middle brow art, okay? That Steven Soderbergh film where George Clooney it takes place in the 1950s, and he's playing Caesar. Any version of Caesar, any Roman movie about Caesar is pretty middle brow. Middle brow incorporates elements of both high art and low art, of low brow or high brow entertainment, and it kind of just finds that middle ground, because most people don't have the attention span, I would argue, for highbrow art, or the education for highbrow art, or the temperament for highbrow art. And most people are too embarrassed to just watch. After the age of 12, I think it becomes very hard to just watch lowbrow art all the time.
Okay, so what year was it you took that class?
It was like 1986, 1987.
Okay, so I took my art and film classes. I went to USC. I studied, took some film classes there, some classes in postmodern art and theory, and that was in the 90s. So the postmodernists the postmodernist philosophers come along, and they say that there are no distinctions. Okay, that there is no distinction between low and high art. So there's no middle brow art either. Of course, it's all just. There's no way to actually make a distinction, which is, something that they said. And the funny thing is about that is that in practice, they're right. Okay. In practice, they're right.
Okay.
Like when people make, like every single movie that starts coming out, like starting in like the 80s, you could say, there isn't much of a distinction between like this is an art movie and this is not an art movie.
I think that you can go back to the history of cinema. There's always been those movies that are treading the line between those two.
Right.
I don't think it was an 80s invention.
Right. But in popular speak, in talk about art and media, everybody says what you say. So it is interesting that I feel that as time has gone on, the postmodernists, have been proven correct. They practically predicted the future and all this, but our culture hasn't really caught up, especially in the way it thinks of.
So you are a postmodernist then, when it comes to, you don't believe in these distinctions at all. You believe that there is no highbrow, lowbrow, middle brow. Everything is just everything. I'm really confused, man. Pretend I'm the dumbest person.
Look at Clerks. Look at the movie Clerks, made by Kevin Smith.
Okay,
is that highbrow or lowbrow?
I would argue that's middle brow.
Okay, well, see, you're arguing it's middle brow because it's a combination, right, of
Well, because it doesn't
high
really.
brow intellectual
Well,
philosophical talk
it's. I
and
think that
low brow scatological humor,
well.
sex humor.
I'll also point out that in order for something to be highbrow, it really has to reach that level of genius. And I love Clerks, but I don't believe it has that level of genius. I think it
I think it does.
definitely is. I think it has a middle brow geniusness to it. I think it definitely shows something, sheds light on the human condition, and it does show us something about
Well,
life. But
talk about a
I feel that it doesn't go high enough to really be.
okay. Well, give me an
It's not like
example.
in a Bergman film. Like,
Can you
for example, yeah, sure.
give me an
I
example of a highbrow piece of work that's recent, the most recent one you can think of? I mean, Bergman. Okay, Bergman's good. Okay, I can see that sort of. I mean, but Bergman's work has examples of lowbrow stuff. I feel, but
Middlebrow, maybe. I've never seen a lowbrow Bergman comedy.
well,
I'd love to have seen that.
There's a rape in a Bergman movie. What is it? Strawberries. What is that called?
Yeah, Virgin Spring. But there's nothing about that that's lowbrow just because there's a rape.
I think that's lowbrow automatically.
No, lowbrow is the whole aesthetic of a film, not an action in a film. Look, kids are farting on candles in Fanny and Alexander. They are literally lighting their farts. That's as lowbrow as you can get. But
okay, give me an
there
example.
is so much going on in Fanny and Alexander.
Give me an example of a work
that makes it highbrow.
Fine. Give me an example. See, this is why the postmodernists threw their hands up.
Tarkovsky films
because the discussions like this.
Highbrow. If you've seen Solaris or Stalker.
Okay, I see. I get your point, but even those movies have parlor tricks. Okay, they have little parlor tricks, little magic tricks that are special effects.
Yeah, that doesn't. You can't.
Yeah, but that's eye candy. That's
you can have eye candy and high art. Of course, you can. It has to do with.
Then it's not high art.
No,
now it's
no. The definition really is what does the film have to say, and in that sense, I do agree when you say is it art. Is the statement of the film, is the thing that's being expressed, how complicated is it? Is it something pretty coarse and vulgar? Is it something very sublime and refined?
I will give you
between the two polarities.
I will give you an example of something I consider you could probably consider high art, like right off the top, is the miniseries, the Chernobyl miniseries. Like it is.
Why would you say that's high art and not middle brow? I've never seen it, but I've never heard of anything being on HBO that was truly high art. I've never.
Oh, Chernobyl is like, wait. I mean, I don't think there's any sex in it.
I think middle brow art can be excellent. Steven Spielberg has built a career making the greatest middle brow films in history. He's not made one highbrow film in his entire career, but man, that guy has really shown you how far you can go in making middle brow work. He definitely finds the profound in these very simple things, and middlebrow is not bad, but I think Chernobyl, from nothing I've read, has indicated to me that I feel weird casting judgment.
Okay, give me a good example of a high art work. Recent.
This is where it gets really uncomfortable, but I will say there's a lot in experimental film that really falls into the area of high art.
Like what? Like what?
Like the Kenneth Anger films. Did you ever watch any of those?
Yes, but that's old, man. Something recent. Something like at least in the 90s.
But that's a good one to pick on because it at least shows you how difficult high art is and how it's not very easy. Even myself, sometimes I love the films of Derek Jackman. Did you ever watch any of his stuff?
No. What's
British filmmaker? More narrative than Kenneth Anger, but still somewhat experimental. And I don't think you have to be an experimental filmmaker, mind you, to make high art. You can pick on Fellini, you can pick on Akira Kurosawa. There are films that are high art that have mainstream roots. Film is just not a genre that has a lot of high art in it because it hasn't been around as long as theater or painting or literature. So it is, I think, a lot harder to get that. I think the very cost of film makes it so that you can't really get by with only a small viewership. Go ahead.
Well, that surely has changed, right? Because of YouTube?
Yeah, that's true. No,
digital video?
Yeah, that's true. There's definitely more outlets. I'm hoping somebody here watching this goes, "Oh, Chris, you're such a snob," or this is high art or that's
See,
high art.
see. Here's
I
the
mean,
funny.
it's very political, you know. I mean, everyone has their own opinion on what is good, bad, and in
Well,
between.
everything's political, but here's the funny thing about what you're saying. You know, is I think the postmodernists were they were seeing the future because, yeah, like I said, we have a time now where you know, we have digital video and YouTube and our show, and you know, the distinction between these distinctions, high art, low art, no one talks about them
I'm going
anymore.
to
I mean,
enforce them. I will enforce them because I feel if you flat first off, postmodernism is 30 years old. That belongs to history. You know, it's not a. They too fell.
postmodernism was the last great intellectual aesthetic philosophy. Nothing has come to replace it yet.
Well, it's still. I'm just saying. I feel that there's a lot of flaws in their conceits. I feel that they don't really appreciate how a cultural artifact works. I think that the reductionist nature of postmodernism. I'm not a big fan of Paul Derrida or the other great book. I'm a structuralist.
Well, I'm not a fan of deconstruction either.
I like
Okay,
structuralism, but
I'm talking about
losing the audience. Let's
look. When I talk about
people.
postmodernism, I'm not talking about deconstruction. Okay, I'm not talking about deconstruction. I'm talking about
Actually, why don't you just
postmodernism in English literature? I'm talking about postmodernism as the aesthetic philosophy, the philosophy about
why
aesthetics.
don't you outline that for people who've never heard of it? Because I guarantee you, someone is watching right now going, "What the fuck is postmodernism, and why is this guy?"
Well,
keep
the
on
main
talking
tenets
about it?
behind. Well, I'm talking. Well, postmodernism, you know, came to encompass. Well, the way it started is, you know, there was modernism. Okay, and everyone knew what modernism was. Okay, modernism was like Ayn Rand loved modernism. You know, the modernism was about taking
Okay,
away.
so what if you're going to define postmodernism as something that comes out of modernism? Then what's modernism?
Well, I'm getting to that. So Ayn Rand liked modernism, okay, because the idea behind modernism was you take away frivolity, right? You take away form follows function, right? Instead of the other way around. So, like in like a modernism is about embracing the Industrial Revolution. It's about embracing science. You know, what is the most scientifically proper way to design a building so you get, you know, perfectly functional building and it just
So
looks like what it looks like.
modernist
Because
artists like Picasso were writing, just painting nothing but very linear, correct things. Modernist composers like Schoenberg with their tonal scales.
I feel like, yes, the tonal scale. That's a perfect example of modernism. So
All right, so Cubism.
that's another good
Tonal
example of modernism, I feel.
Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture,
It's a good example of
Bauhaus
modernism, I feel.
architecture. So just to give people a grounding, the form is the aesthetic, is what you're saying in modernism. That
Modernism is
Virginia Woolf, who plays with the forms in narrative storytelling. William Faulkner, who plays with the forms in narrative storytelling. These are modernist writers. I'm just trying to help you define modernism so that you can then give us postmodernism.
I probably have a really esoteric, individualistic interpretation of it, but yeah, I mean,
because I feel like you don't want to lead with Ayn Rand because she's her own thing, you know. Whereas those things that I've just outlined give you a sense of what modernism is in a very mainstream way.
I actually think Rand is a good example of modernist thought. Okay, and in fact, if you read Ann's work,
how so? How so?
If you read Rand's work, Ayn Rand's work, she is obsessed with modernism. I mean,
how so? Just what is it that about? Why do you feel that she is an exemplar?
I think it's the
modernism?
Fountain. She is a character in the Fountain that's an architect. I hope I got the work right, and he is a modernist architect, and he wants form to follow function, and he's obsessed with it. He's obsessed with making the perfect functional building for poor people, for civilization, and he wants to make it as efficient as possible, you know, and he can do this because he is a genius. He understands science. He understands materials. He
Yeah,
understands.
there's a rumor that Rand had an affair with Frank Lloyd Wright, and that character is based on Frank Lloyd Wright, who
All right, that's very
it
interesting.
pretty much sounds like when you describe that guy, is a very,
Okay, well there you go. There you go.
cool, efficient stylist
Right. I
of
mean,
art.
I mean,
Okay.
maybe Rand is not. I mean, maybe there's
No, I
problems
think
with
you're. I
suggesting
think
her,
you're
but
right.
she
I
is a
think you're right.
perfect.
I think,
She
but
loved modernism. She is a perfect
we,
example of somebody who
yeah.
loved modernism, created art. In fact, you look at her art. Okay, her art. She's basically writing romance novels. Okay, and to explain her philosophy. And
Mm.
why does she
Or
do that?
is she writing philosophy novels to explain her romance? Well, because she's had an affair with Frank Lloyd Wright. I'm just saying.
Right, maybe, but I mean, in a sense, she's not a modernist artist. Like,
Okay, well, I think you've done a good
but
job
she does
outlining.
love modernism.
Yeah.
She
Okay.
creates she has an obvious love of modernism. Um,
But I get your point. I think we've defined what modernism is.
okay, in the fine
Uh,
arts, just let me say, in the fine arts, modernism is about asking questions about what it is, like what art is. Okay, so minimalist art is considered very modernist by a lot of people because
right.
minimalist art asks questions like, okay, here's a painting. The painting is just a blank canvas. Okay, and it's like,
No.
well, it's asking a question of what the hell a painting is.
Modernist painters and modernist composers will often use numbers for titles.
Right.
Color spectrum 32,
That's a minimalistic.
orange,
That's minimalism. That's a minimalistic approach.
symphony,
Reductionist.
right? It's reduction. There are things that are labeled as almost they're like almost to look like an academic abstract.
Right. And so here's the
And
problem.
the concept is very big in
Right. It's all about,
modernism.
it's very conceptual. Like people
Yeah,
sometimes talk about conceptual art. Okay. Which I
yeah,
really enjoy.
yeah.
And I like any art that's strongly based around concepts. I think that's
Right.
important in art, but that's a very modernist concept. The
Yeah.
idea or an
And this
idea. That's
becomes,
a
I think, that it's a dominant aesthetic from the late 19th century to, I would argue, probably the end of the 1960s. It
right.
really it rules the roost for almost 70, 80 years
Right. Right.
as the dominant aesthetic in all of the arts. And then in the early 60s, you see the beginning, and then by the 70s, the ascendance in architecture and literature in many areas of the world of postmodernism.
Well,
So why don't you
let me get to
talk
that.
a
So
little? Yeah, if you're
I'll
ready.
give you another wrinkle. Maybe this isn't important, but Hitler and the Nazis, they hated modern art, right?
Yeah,
They preferred a style that was like a retrograde, that would go back to some sort of to figures. They wanted to go back to forms and figures and representational art. Okay,
yeah, they were very much into artist mythos, iconicism. Yeah,
well, they wanted beauty. They wanted aesthetics back in art. They
yes,
wanted art to be about aesthetics instead of concepts. Okay, they
right.
wanted it to be about decoration instead of conceptual.
Which is
And
very weird because I would argue that Albert Speer was a remarkably modernist architect.
yeah, true, but his work, he was going for a certain aesthetic in his work too. I
Yeah,
mean,
and the greatest contribution to architecture that come out of Germany of the period, I would argue, at least in the 20th century, is the Bauhaus Dessau movement, which is very modernist. So yeah, it is interesting. But you're right, and the same in Italy, where Futurism was a great movement of modernism. But again, uh, Mussolini wanted great Romanesque work. He was a romantic. Yes, fascists
right.
were in
There's a certain
general in love with 19th century ornamentalism.
there's a certain
Absolutely.
sense there's a certain sense with the Nazis and fascist movements that it was a rejection of the modern world. It was a rejection of the Industrial Revolution. It was like, how let's get Hitler in power so we could turn back the clock and destroy the
Well,
Industrial
I mean,
Revolution.
no, fascism, Nazism was considered the third wave. So it was neither an embrace of communism and socialism
Well, communism,
or of capitalism,
look,
or of capitalism. It was that third wave philosophy
yeah, the
of a
third
very
wave
of
is destroying the
state-controlled
Industrial
government.
Revolution, is going back
No,
into
no, no, not no. It was not. No, no. Now you're saying things are just factually inaccurate, and
no,
I
it's
have to
factually
correct
true.
you.
But look, here,
No, the industrialism was part of fascist society. They were not trying to be
It
like
was because you
Bukharin and
can't
live
really
in the past. They weren't getting rid of any of their electricity. They
right
weren't
because
getting
they
rid of.
wanted to have because they weren't hippies. They wanted to have their cake and eat it too. They
Well,
wanted to
no,
turn
no.
back the clock.
They
They wanted to turn back the
rejected.
clock, but still have TV.
Well,
They
no,
didn't have TV back then.
they
Or radio.
rejected socialism, communism, and and capitalism. They believed in a society where the state had controls over the means of production, but also individuals' loyalty to a society
Right,
was
but
greater than in a
okay,
democracy.
but
But
culturally
no, I mean,
speaking,
now I don't get me to defend
all right. But look, this
fascism.
is my opinion.
And you're getting so
Culturally
far
speaking,
away. You're getting so far away from postmodernism that
well, just let me get there. Just let me
okay,
get
get
there.
there, man.
Culturally
Okay.
speaking, I do believe that fascism, Hitler especially, was some sort of desire to turn back the clock, get rid of the modernist aesthetic, and the modernist
Absolutely.
aesthetic.
I agree with you 100%
Okay,
that aesthetically speaking,
right,
they were reactionary. It's why he loved Wagner so much.
right.
Because
The
Wagner
modernist
talked about the
aesthetic,
great German mythos. Yeah.
right. The modernist aesthetic is about bringing to art what the Industrial Revolution brought to everything else in our civilization, which is efficiency and uh, efficiency mostly. Okay, so so here's the thing. You're right. So modernism is a movement that continues well into the '60s, right? Pop art is the first real. I feel like pop art is the first real uh, Andy Warhol we're talking about.
Right.
Pop art is the first real challenge to
The
modernism.
first deconstruction of modernism.
And
He would take commercial art and subvert it. He would paint a tin can, a Campbell soup can, and he would change the color scheme, or he would just draw it exactly as it is and force you to look at Campbell soup and the industrial art, not the industrial art, the commercial art. He started out as an illustrator in advertising.
right,
So
which
he
is
took
interesting.
his skill in advertising and taking a very consumer-like thing like a soup can and framing it either in its natural colors or changing the colors or changing the shape and forcing you to look at it not as what it was originally, but to see it as something else.
Right. Well, to
He's
see it as something
controversial
beautiful.
too, because
To see it as something beautiful, right? I
yeah,
mean, this is
as
the interesting
beautiful.
about it.
Yeah.
Because modernism and the Industrial Revolution are all about efficiency. It's all about saying form follows function. This soup can is merely the most efficient way we can package the soup. Okay. This label on the soup can is, I don't know, it's like it's the most efficient way to communicate what the hell's in the soup can. And so Warhol, I'm almost done. So and that's calling me. So Warhol
Your girlfriend.
yeah, I know.
Ma, we're talking about structuralism.
Well, why don't you eat and go ahead. All right. So anyway, so what Warhol's trying to do is oh god, I lost my train of thought now.
What
So
he's trying to do is to take something that we look up in one way, in a very modernistic way, and look at it through what I would argue is a postmodern spectrum. It's almost like putting the glasses on from They Live, and you all of a sudden see the hidden codes, or you're forced to reevaluate how you view reality, which is a very big part of postmodernism.
It's like you could say, oh, this soup can, it's not just a piece of industrial efficiency, it's also beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay.
And now you have to look at it in a way that you've never looked at it before.
Right. And these comic book strips, okay, who's that guy that put up the comic book strips as fine art? I forget, but
Roy Lichtenstein.
So it's like
he actually made his own comic strips. He would paint scenes in the style of a comic.
Well, you know, I think it's been proven he stole some of those too, but it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. But he's saying the same thing, you know, it's like the comic book, it's not just like some industrial commercial way to sell sell a story, you know. It's
an interesting
beautiful
point, because Marvel Comics cashed in on that, and they used to call it op art. And even the way they did their illustrations started to change so that they would have splash pages and they would break out of the formalism of the traditional 5-color spectrum.
Right. So this is my point.
Panels.
So this is my point. Hitler and Warhol and the postmodernists. And the postmodernists, you know, they're able to turn into a philosophy. They were all able to express it, you know, verbally. They all wanted the same thing. They wanted to bring aesthetics back to art. Okay, whereas the modernists were trying to do what everybody in the Industrial Revolution, what the engineers in the Industrial Revolution were doing. They were trying to engineer art.
Right.
You know, and modernism, minimalism, it leaves a lot of people cold, right? So even
Right.
Warhol, he started out being kind of a minimalist, and that left him cold, and he turned into a pop artist, you know.
Okay.
And
So now you get to Paul Damon, Jacques Derrida, Philip Johnson, the
well, you know,
architect. These are the big postmodernists.
well, they're
And
considered postmodernists, but you know, I don't know if I would consider them postmodernists.
oh no, they are absolutely. That's not something you get to choose. That's Wikipedia them. Look it up. They are Derrida and Paul Damon are postmodernist philosophers, and Philip Johnson is considered the father of the postmodernist architecture movement. So that's not for debate.
Okay, well, I'll talk about Derrida.
You may disagree. You may not agree with the classification, but for those people watching, that's exactly what they are. Go ahead, talk about Derrida.
Well, I'll talk about Derrida is yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'd include him. What I'm talking about is aesthetics, right?
Right.
Is like a movement in aesthetics, and if you're dealing with the written word like Derrida, then it's a totally different subject. I feel like.
No, that's why it's easier to pick on Philip Johnson, because he's an architect and he's all aesthetics and forms.
Okay, I'm not that familiar with his work.
Actually, his career begins in America in the mid '60s. So you could actually say that by the end of the '60s, which is concurrent with what you're talking about with Warhol, the beginnings of postmodernism are beginning. You're already seeing this counter movement away from form and function into these postmodern elements that you've been talking about. So really, by the time we get to the '70s, modernism is completely on the way out, and now it is the ascendance of postmodernism. Definitely in academia by the 1980s.
So we need to bring this back to what we were talking about before.
Well,
how
you were
did I
talking
get on
about
this tangent?
I asked you to define your terms because you were saying how the postmodernists, they don't play this game of classification. I do, which is
right.
that's
This
high
is
art,
why.
this is middle brow, and this is low brow.
This is why they don't play the game of classification, because to the postmodernists are looking for what's after modernism. They're looking for what I think, just like Hitler almost, they're looking for a return to aesthetics, a return to beauty, right? Return to eye candy.
Right.
Okay. And what the postmodernists might say, maybe, is there's eye candy and beauty in even high art. That's what makes it art, because art is all about the beauty. Okay.
I would agree.
And you're looking at art.
But I would agree, of course. I mean, Wagner, perfect example. Go back to him. He's high art. You know, there's a lot of high. Why?
Yeah.
Because of the complexity of compositions, the way that he deals with subject matter, the issues that he's addressing. To me, most people would argue the gradations of a work of art is to how much, what does it have to say and how well it says. Goethe, who has the three reasons in his criticism, and I don't remember them now. I just remember one of the three was, is it worth making? The other two is, I think, has something. I should look it up right now. I'm going to look it up right now. But no, I'll just stick with that, which is it worth making? Does the artist have something to say, and is it worth saying? And I would argue to the degree that is worth saying is to the degree of what kind of art it is. Clerks says a lot about what it's like to work at a Joe job in 1992, but it doesn't. It does only go so far as what it's like to have money or not have money or to work hard. There's a limit to just how far it goes. And it doesn't settle on the higher truth. It settles on a really good joke. And that's certainly,
I don't agree with that.
My personal opinion. There's the highest truth of Clerks is pretty nicely grounded right to the middle. You know, it reveals something about what it's like to work, and it's very honest and it's very real. But at the
Okay.
end of the day, I think it settles
I guess
for a middle ground of what's funny.
what I want to say about these distinctions you're trying to make
I
is
mean, it dies with him getting shot. Remember, oh, it was supposed to be my day off. I mean, it ends literally on a punchline. It ends very jokey. It ends very, and high art works don't end in a jokey way. If they're funny or not, they end in a way that leaves you with something a little bit more profound and something a little more impactful.
it sounds almost to me like the distinctions you're making is between modern art and non-modern art. So if something's conceptual, if it's minimalistic, then you're considering it high art.
No, but it's certainly, if it's employing those devices, it's asking you to do a bit more work than middlebrow or lowbrow artworks. There's very little demand on you when you watch lowbrow art, and there's just a little bit of a demand on you in middlebrow, but not a lot.
See, so this is what I want to say about this, your distinctions you're making and the postmodern aesthetic. The idea behind the postmodern aesthetic is uh, the postmodernists were really like Warhol, Hitler. Who was the third one I cited? They were
Philip
trying,
Johnson?
no, but maybe, but they were trying to get to somewhere beyond modernism, right? Postmodernism.
Yeah, they were
That's where
looking for the
the
next. They were looking for the next
what
level,
is
the
the
next
next
new
artistic
paradigm.
movement? What comes after
Yeah,
modernism, right? Well, you know
right,
what?
and
Here's
that was postmodernism.
right,
Okay,
and when the term postmodernism was coined, I don't even know when it was coined.
I will
I
say
think
that
it
you're
might have
forgetting
been
the you
100
are
years ago.
forgetting the whole world of structuralism, which you've completely ignored, which is the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School, which occurs during the modernist era in Germany, first in the 30s, and then in America during it moves after to New York City to the New School in World War One. And the structuralists were people who were involving, say, psychological theory with English. So Walter Benjamin would take Freudian theory and English, and he'd combine them together. Herbert Marcuse would take Freudian theory, Nietzsche, and Marx, and combine them into these grand structuralist theories, which is why the postmodernists are also called the deconstructionalists, which is a very big part of who Paul de Man was, and also Jacques Derrida. So when the two words, someone will hopefully argue with me that postmodernism and deconstructionism are not one and the same, but they are almost always considered hand in hand.
I know that
part of
people
that.
put them together, but I don't agree.
They exist because they're because really what the deconstructionalists are doing is they're attacking the structuralist models of using art and philosophy and psychoanalytic theory to interpret the undercurrents of society. They work in the models are just in opposition, in the same way that the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church fought bloody battles against each other. Even if they both accept the concept of a God and a Christian God, their ways of going about it could not be more diametrically opposed. And that is how I feel between the structuralists and the deconstructionalists. The deconstructionalists truly are basically the opposite in that sense. And it informs what postmodernism is. Right now, you can attack my desire to put a taxonomy or a category on what kind of art is what kind of art. You know, that there is classifications. I feel like if anyone is still watching, thank you. I appreciate that. We should probably just wrap it up because it's like an argument that will never end. So,
Well, I had a
Randall,
point to make. Let me finally
make your
make it.
point, please. Make your point, man.
Okay. So I guess my point is that, you know, postmodernism is an old term. I think it was coined almost at the same time as modernism because people were like, well, they're looking to the next movement already, you know, because that's how the arts used to be. You know, used to be all these art movements. But the problem is modernism might be the last art movement. Okay.
Modernism could be cited as early as the 19th century. Postmodernism as a word could not be cited before the 1960s. So there's almost like
I don't think
50
that's
or
true. I think it came around
yeah, we have
earlier.
computers. I will be more than happy to Google
Okay,
the
but
term.
still, the 1960s is rather early because a lot of people would say, "Oh, postmodernism, that's like from the 80s," you know.
As I said before, it's when it comes into ascendance.
Okay, but here's my point. Let me make my point.
Please do.
My point is that people were looking to what was after modernism before they knew what was after modernism. So people were trying to define the postmodernist art movement before it existed. So that's what has been going on. And the reason is because so many people hate modernism. So many people hate the idea that science, technology, the Industrial Revolution, all this stuff, all the stuff about the modern world should define art. Okay, that conceptual, something efficiency, that conceptualism should define
there's
art.
a feeling that if modernism is taken too extreme, you lose the emotional context of art.
Exactly. This is why
there
postmodernism.
is a feeling that when you're looking at, say, you go to an art museum.
Now you're talking like Hitler.
Thank you. I don't even think that's remotely funny.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
If you go to an art museum and you see a sculpture by Henry Moore, which is an oblong piece of shaped metal, or a Richard Serra, which is wrought iron, you can think about it as far as the texture, the color, the shape. But if you look at what's the most famous French sculptor, help me here, Rodin. You're looking at Rodin, a sculpture in marble of a human being, whether it's Rodin or the ancient Greeks, David by Michelangelo. You don't have to think about it. You're not doing the work. You're emotionally looking at that person, and you are looking at their expression. You're looking at their face, and you are instinctively and intuitively reacting to that work. And I will say that there is and maybe this would have been a good topic for another day. Is the difference between the elements in art that make you think versus the elements of art that make you feel. And I think that you can have art. You can have art with no thought and just all feeling. When you're a child, those are the nursery rhymes that make no sense. I was watching Saturday Night Live at home and was trying to explain to my girlfriend why I love that sketch. What's up with that? And there's really no reason to like it because it makes no sense. It's just literally the joy of singing a song that is almost nonsensical over and over at odd and weird times, and then just breaking into dance. There is no intellectually. There's nothing.
Yeah. See, so now you become a postmodernist.
No, I'm just explaining in art that you can make art that is just raw emotion or pure emotion without any thought, and it's highly enjoyable. I think that one of the reasons why people never got into, say, Schoenberg or John Cage or any of the other, tonal composers, late 20th century classical music composers, is because they are such heady and intellectual experiences that unless you already can meet the work on a more cultivated and a more intellectual level, you're just not on a more analytical levels, really want to say, you're not going to get that feeling. You're not going to connect. I think that art that has nothing to say intellectually or analytically is beautiful but limited. And I think art that has something to say aesthetically and intellectually is gorgeous. And then art that is just all analytical without any really warmth or anything, it's a tougher nut. I love that stuff, but you really have to be built for that. I love abstractionism. I love 50s artwork because of that.
Well, this is
artwork.
Well, I think you've just expressed really well why postmodernism as a concept exists, because modernism aesthetically leaves people cold.
It can make people cold. I love that stuff. So for me,
I can
look at Rothko color lines and experience a wealth of experiences and feelings, even though it's just literally 3 slabs of art layered on top of each other with a white background. And yet it moves me in a way that, say, a great pastoral Gainsborough painting might not.
Yeah, but it's no Guardians of the Galaxy 2, am I right?
And on that happy note, let's probably leave our audience with a lot to digest. I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
Be well and be safe. And thanks for joining.